been reading a book, something like Demystifying Religion, I think it's called. Not sure about that, I'll check that later. It's of the view that religion is based on the mysteries of creation myths that have almost from the beginning come to be quickly adapted to being religions. That really, first of all, they were simply an understanding of, well, he divides it into involution, the creation of matter from space, and evolution, the creation of, I think it means thoughtful life, or man, or creatures upon the planet. So the basic theory is that space is, well, not the emptiness it appears, and that a star forms in space. This is an astonishing something that happens. It glows hot and becomes a full star, not just yellow, but perhaps even sort of white light. It's so bright. And goes on for millions of years, of course, and the whole process is very long. And then starts to burn out, if you like, crusts over and becomes a planet. Now, at that point, of course, does it have a neighbouring star to receive light and energy? And it's going to be key. Or is it a wandering sort of planet on its own, a dead star that is waiting to be captured, if you like, by another body that does have I think there's something about a weight distribution might be relevant here, that the star loses weight as it gives off energy, and if you like, it transfers back its matter into energy, which it disperses off into the universe. And if you're the right distance from such a star, then you can have he didn't specify all these details, but I can imagine you then get an evolution stage of, if you like, thoughtful beings, man, creatures, plants to begin with, on this crust that's, that the Earth, for instance, is really just a star with, it's an old star. Yeah. It's an interesting view, so that the myths actually are the explanation for our being. We're not, in the myths, therefore, actually talking about gods, but forces. Not good forces or bad, they are just forces. And, mankind might go on for millions of years being unkind, and the whole animal kingdom, preying and living off each other. We're not saying there's anything good or bad, I suppose it's to say that there was a scientific view that is pre our own, and the knowledge of it, or the understanding of it, is encoded in the myths that we've received in the form of, as if they were personified powerful beings. But not really, that's just the story to hold it. Now, as a not terribly uplifting theory, obviously, and I'm thinking, where does, you see something like the Christian story, Jesus' story, as being a corruption of the myths, a really poor effort, comprehensive in that it's pulled all sorts of myths together which were essentially of the same story originally, and it's added a few things like, a loving God, a God that's personal, a God that's purposefully created man, that this gloss has been put on the explanations for how the world exists and how man exists. I don't find this a disastrous view. I'm thinking that we've put this on for the same reason as I have, personally. By which I mean I've assumed the existence of a loving, wonderful God, all-powerful perhaps, and all-loving perhaps. And I've not found much benefit from believing otherwise. Obviously not in a harmful God, and not even in the absence of such a God. So I choose to believe, and in as far as I do so choose, my actions in life is affected. My decisions are different, of course, you see, to not doing so. And then I ask myself, well, am I the happier for this? Oh, yes. Wonderful things seem to happen, and I'm blessed. I feel a blessing, and if you like, I feel creative. I feel life has meaning, and I'm joyful and at peace. And when I'm not, I think, well, let's repair the house. I mean, my spiritual mind, remind myself, what am I choosing to believe? That He's a loving God, and that He's blessing me through this difficulty, this dullness, this lack of joy today. I shall live accordingly, that I shall thank Him for it, and remind myself of all the good that He's given me in the past, and that this flat time can change, just as it always has in the past. And I'll trust Him for it. And I find this trust gives me impetus, desire to, and momentum to act accordingly in hope. And hope, of course, is the foundation on which change religion's about. Hope is what fires your volition, and volition means that you're doing something towards what you hope for. And that does change your future. Might be quite miraculously, like my ability to study. I found that it gave a fantastic reward of success. Or my ability to get on with, say, Dad, or difficult teachers. Oh, it was, wow. So greatly encouraged. Do you see my choice of what to believe is now reinforced as a good idea? I'm sticking with this. This is bringing in the goods. Now, religions are very varied, aren't they? But they may each be embraced by people generally or not, according to whether they find they are of benefit or not. And if not, then, well, the religion gets neglected. Of course, the more it's neglected, the less it's held to be of much use, so it's not even looked at and reviewed. Yeah, that's understandable. I think I follow what could be going on here. Let me have a rest a sec. What I think is important is that the book is not inspiring in itself, but it's enlightening in that he may well have how things have come about. And it's very interesting that in these myths that come from ancient times, in particular, I thought it was interesting that he takes it that stars appear in what appears to be void space, and they have a lifetime very long, what he describes as this period of involution. They become planets as they crossed over because they've used up their energy and become smaller in some sense, less mass. And then life becomes possible on the surface of such a planet, depending if there's a star at the right distance nearby and so forth. You know, conditions could be right for some form of life. He seems to think this was a view that was there in ancient times. Notice we are talking about spheres and planets. It's not a flat earth theory, it's well, certainly some of the religions had very flat earth type views. You know, Indian sort of picture I've got in my mind of 4 elephants holding up a land surface, and the world is that, you know. So I'm not quite sure where he's got this creative view of a physical. It's very much a physical view, isn't it? There's nothing really spiritual in the view. What seems to be of tremendous value, as I see it, in something like the Christian story, but any religion that includes an ethical system that develops ethics, it's relational, and relationships are crucial given our extraordinary ability to specialize in groups group can achieve far more working as a group than as separate individuals. So philosophy, what we now call a religion, that's concerned with interpersonal relationships, ethics, is a fantastic leap forward in our creative potential. So a basic religion like the Hebrew religion of, say, for argument's sake, 2,500, 3,000 years ago, is a tremendous step forward, although preoccupied with the ideal society, because civilization enables man to do so much more and be so much more effective than the lack of civilization. And civilization turns on relationships being of a certain reliable and safe pattern. You know, I can step out of my house, go to work, I come back in the evening, it's still there, intact, nobody's ransacked it. You know, in that sense, any form of government is better than none, even if it's the most appalling. You could say, well, I don't know about that in the extreme, but, you know, something of that. Obviously, we still prefer better governments to poor. Let me pause again. When I pause, what I do is I tend usually to go back to the beginning and run through the recording again. Yes, I wanted to say so-and-so sort of thing. And then I add another, in effect, note at the end, which can develop greatly, of course. Yes, so in summary, what I wanted to say was, the book is not too enlightening in itself, but I see how my view of religion is not based on the myths, but rather what seems reasonable to me in the now. And if such reasoning results in actions that I find successful, happy, good outcome, then it reinforces my religiously developed view. I might drop the word religion now and say my philosophical view. In other words, it doesn't turn on the validity of the myth or the religion or the story. It turns on my attentive rational thinking of what seems to be best to do. And that seems to include attention to what I'm trusting and believing, and choosing what I'm trusting and believing. So I'm saying, in effect, all sorts of beliefs are up for grabs. What grabs me of those beliefs? Well, I'd like it to be, quite simply, an all-powerful God that loves us, and that all this otherwise apparent distress and suffering and chaos and variability of good and bad all has a very good meaning. So I'm assuming, I'm trusting, I'm choosing a particular line of reasoning and meaning. And with a little experience, I then find that this is more successful than what I was not believing before. You know, what I was believing otherwise or not believing at all. So I continue in the direction that I'm moving, in holding to these beliefs that I find best, not only that appeal to me as what I would like, but also I'm getting confirmation of in the practice of such. That in some sense seems to me to be an ideal. It's not quite the same as cold science, which doesn't move ahead until something is confirmed by a lot of proof. You know, science has almost degenerated, I would say, into a state of mind which doesn't consider seriously a possibility until it's been confirmed by all sorts of experimentation and inquiry. And the desire to inquire is not there until it's been confirmed. So the confirming is done by mavericks who experiment believing that this could be the case. And the more they experiment, the more they find evidence consistent with it being the case. And then the mainstream science comes on and says, oh, that's interesting, I suppose we could look at it. You've got a lot of evidence here that seems to support this. And suddenly you're no longer seen as the scientific nutter, the outcast, but someone who should be taken a bit seriously. Perhaps he's got a point here. And the mainstream science starts to do its research, probably along the lines that you've done it, with additions, and starts to take the theory on board. So I might find and do that thanking God for good things and focusing on whatsoever's good and lovely is quite uplifting. Oh, well, I'll continue doing it then. I then find when I extend it to things that are not particularly good or bad, helps me get out of the doldrums and depressions of such times. Oh, well, that's interesting. I'll add that to my repertoire of possible actions, then I'll do that. And then I add to it, how about thanking God for minor problems? Missed the bus, or it's raining, or so-and-so's late, or I missed this, or I can't find so-and-so. How about thanking God for that? You might say, my imaginary God. Oh, this is astonishing there. This gives me peace of mind. Instead of being all distressed and aggravated and happy and annoyed. And I so often see that it turns out to be a blessing. Or I find the object or the thing goes right, or, well, it's sunny now and I've got through the bad time rather well. So I'm starting to develop my religion, if you like, my philosophy, I'm predisposed now to thank God even for quite big difficulties. Is that better than not? Oh my goodness, yes. I was not too unhappy. I could have been far more unhappy. Oh, quite positive, in fact, and still enjoying life, even in the difficulty. And the difficulties seem to change. The difficulty themselves seem to be helped by, even removed by, with the passage of time, perhaps, and amazing good fortune. I start to see almost miracles. Do you see? I'm greatly encouraged. I'm finding this a very successful, fulfilling way of life. Now, these are not particularly ethical things, you see. I don't mean they're unethical. In my case, I believe they are, because I'm thinking that the ethical is consistent with some sort of perfect world, even a heavenly world. And I'm now going into, aren't I, developing a view that perhaps we're here to sort our values out. If I sort my values out and attend to them, do I find being here is happier, better, more fulfilling? Yes, I do. And when I'm concerned about caring for others, well, I get some very good friendships and very good reactions from people. They're appreciative of it, and we have rather a good time together. We have fellowship. I find this very valuable, very helpful. Do you see? It may be that religion is founded upon ancient myth, which was simply a way of even hiding what we might call sort of pre-scientific understanding. But that doesn't mean it couldn't develop in itself. Develops into ethical religions that support, that maintain societies, and can develop further into other beliefs and trusts that bless your personal happiness and being. And I see the Jesus story in that way as a zenith in its time of doing just that. I don't mean I see it as perfect. You know, for instance, I don't even find the main character, Jesus, as perfect. I remember my friend who I was encouraging to be Christian, student of mine, he said, well, I don't think Jesus is a particularly kind person. He gets angry, and I don't particularly see that. And I thought, my goodness, you're right. It doesn't come across as perfectly kind in the story. In other words, I'm not seeing the Jesus story as the end product that we must now worship and never change. It can be upgraded. You know, Jesus may have eaten fish. That doesn't mean I have to eat fish. He might have eaten meat. After all, he seems to have been a Jew and they ate Passover. But that doesn't mean to say I have to. And I think I'm better for not. I'm happier for not exploiting the animal world in this way, and as far as I can avoid it. And then substantially I can avoid it. That's good. We do what we can, not what we can't. So I'm finding the book helpful and interesting, enlightening on as regards actually pulling together what we might think of as prehistory, pre the literature that we've now got. And of course it's strongly recognised that the literature we've got is anything but perfect. Fair enough, but perhaps the Jesus story and some of the other religions too are very helpful as regards not only ethics, how we are with each other, but how we are in ourselves, how we view things, if you like, our internal happiness and being. And I think the Jesus story is a very good example of a development that is very helpful and beneficial. You know, to trust that God is your heavenly dad, all capable and loves you, does give you a belief foundation that seems very beneficial in practice. taste and see. Do you find it so too? If you don't, well, you'll throw it out the window and choose something better. But it's interesting to be told by someone like myself that it can be extremely valuable, a wonderful blessing. I commend it to you, as indeed the Jesus story does, doesn't it? I mean, in John alone, John's Gospel, he calls God Dad over 100 times, as far as I can see, more or less. And it doesn't refer to God as anything other than Father, Dad, Abba. Certainly commending it to us, perhaps for a good reason, and perhaps for a very benevolent reason, that at base, at heart, whoever introduced this into the story and those that encouraged it may have done so out of a very good purpose, wanted to bless each other, wanted to bless us, all down the ages. Wouldn't I love to bless everyone in the next 2,000 years? You could say the Jesus story didn't. You know, it resulted in terrible wars and racism and so forth, but perhaps that wasn't what was really in the story. Perhaps the story itself was battling with a religion that wasn't too perfect, but made great strides in the right direction. And perhaps we could make great strides further. I think, it's not very humble saying this, but I feel I have. I've sort of used the Jesus story as a launching platform to go much further. Yeah. But what do you think? How are you blessed? If you choose what you believe, is this a good idea? Do you find it a blessing when you choose what you want to believe? Do you find that the experience of such makes you modify what you now choose, that your values are changing? And couldn't this actually be exactly why we're here? And perhaps we're learning for a most wonderful spiritual state of indeed life eternal. Not this material life here, but who in some spiritual sense we really are. By spiritual you could say mental thought sense, ideas. Everything has to be thought to us, doesn't it? Or we don't experience it at all. Everything has to be translated into thought. We seem to be somewhere there or behind whatever thought is. And I think what behind the thought could be our values. And our experience here in this universe seems to be changing our values. Right. Let's set about changing them for the best. How do we know? How do we find out? Well, we look. We observe how people with different values fare, how they turn out as regards their happiness and survival and meaning to life. And we choose accordingly. Wow. We could be going places. Do I gain anything by not believing we could be going places? No. Right, well, I'm going to believe that we're being trained for life eternal, which is not my own idea, of course. It's come from the Jesus story. What a blessing this story is. I don't mean it's to be worshipped, but what a help. Well, do you find it to be a help? waste in the sea. Thank you, Dan.